All right, welcome to the webinar, everyone. So we are going to do something a little bit different tonight. Usually we have farm panel, but because we were able to get Dave for this webinar, we're going to have Dave do most of the presenting. I prepared a little bit myself, which is unlike me to prepare for the webinar. And then, of course, we're going to have question period at the end. So as per usual, put your questions in the Q&A, not the chat. We're giving away a jacket again. Best question, second best question judged by me is a Covers & Co hat. So here's the format that we're looking at tonight. Basically, all the questions that you guys put in when you were registering for this webinar, I went through them, made a summary of trying to capture everyone's questions all at once. And then I sent the questions on to Dave, so Dave had some time to prepare. But basically, we've broken it into 4 different sections, which is just starting out, profitability, marketing, and succession. So we've got a number of questions for each one of those headings. Dave, if you're there, if you want to turn your video and mic on, a man who probably needs no introduction for the crew that's on tonight. Dave, probably the #1 question, I didn't tell you this, was obviously lots of people that are on tonight have taken the course. Everyone's just kind of wondering, how's retirement and what the heck are you up to these days?
Last year, I averaged 10 miles a day walking. And most of that walking is listening to podcasts or books on tape and stuff like that. Went backpacking on the Lost Coast. For Christmas last year, my daughter gave me a backpack trip with her that she organized up California's Lost Coast, which is up on the northwestern, well, of course it's the western coast. There is no eastern coast, but up on the north coast of California, there's a huge roadless section. And it's a nearly inaccessible stretch of coastline. And it's been called the hardest flat hike in the world. A lot of it's over boulders and sand, but a lot of it you can't do when the tide is in. You have to wait for low tide, otherwise you get swept out. And you have some real interesting close encounters with sea lions and seals and otters and all sorts of wonderful creatures. So I spent a week with her backpacking the coast, and then a week with my son backpacking in the High Sierra last summer. And so there's a lot of stuff like that. I'm involved with Habitat for Humanity, with some other, the Solano County Land Trust, and other organizations that I feel pretty strongly about. And I make noise with my guitar, and I've been working on another book, and
Nice.
stuff like that. So, and I got my baseball trip every year, as we were talking about earlier. So
We're doing a joint trip to Arizona spring 2026 for the World Baseball Classic.
very
Well,
good, very good. Well, you have to, I've always thought you have to care about something in your life that doesn't matter.
yeah.
And for me, it's baseball.
I tell people I'm a very, very rational human being, except when it comes to baseball. I'm just an irrational sports fan at my core. So Dave, maybe for those of people on the webinar that don't know who you are, give us a little bit about your background and the work that you did for decades.
Okay. I grew up in a small place in Northern California. It was really nothing more than a hobby. It required off-farm income to make ends meet. Uh, I I figured I'd never go to college. I didn't think I was very smart because I'm pretty severely dyslexic. Had a hard time reading. In fact, couldn't read until after 8th grade. And as a result, my grades weren't very good. And so I started fighting fire and shearing sheep and doing things like that. When I got to be a little older, I realized that was, by the time I got 40, that might not be as much fun as it was when I was 20. So I went to a local community college and actually did well and made a difference being able to read. Uh, and I thought if I could do the community college, maybe I could do a state college. And I did okay there. So I thought if I can do a state college, maybe I can do the University of California. And I did okay there. And at UC, I was going to study animal science, but I decided to study range management because in the course catalog for animal science, it says you have to take biochemistry. And biochemistry sounded hard. and I didn't want to do something that was really hard. So I took range management instead. It turns out that you have to take biochemistry to get a master's in range, and I was right. It is really hard. Um, but when I was a student, my professors talked about these two guys they called snake oil salesmen and heretics, Alan Savory and Stan Parsons. And they said they were talking about moving cows around in circles, which is not what they were talking about at all. But if that had been what they were talking about, then they would have been right. That would have been crazy. Um, but when somebody in a position of authority tells you not to do something, what is it you want to do?
Try it out.
That thing, right? So I went to hear him talk. And by that time they'd split up. I mean, Alan had brought the ecology and the grazing side of the partnership. Stan brought the animal science and the economic side of the partnership, and neither one brought any people skills at all. Um, and they had what Stan referred to as a Rhodesian conversation, which is a bold statement followed by a flat denial with ensuing verbal abuse and finally physical violence. And that was the end of the partnership. But I went to hear Savory, and it didn't sound like snake oil. I mean, he was talking about uh, grass and animals and people and money as though they weren't four different topics. It was one topic, and he called that holism. And I went to the school, and it was good, but I didn't really have a clear idea as to what to do with it when I got back. And then I was talking to a producer who'd worked with both Savory and Parsons, and he said, "Yeah, Savory will expand your mind, but if you want to learn how to make it work, go see Stan." And not to diss the Savory stuff at all, because I think that gave me a leg up. There's some similarities in some of the, especially the ecological and grazing things. Um, but in when I took the holistic management stuff, it was pretty clear to me that these guys are out to save the world, and I thought more power to them. That's great. But when I took the ranching for profit stuff from Stan, it was clear to me that he didn't care about saving the world. All he wanted to do was save my ranch. And you know what? I don't know how to save the world, but I do know how to help somebody figure out a solution on their ranch. Um, and it was interesting to me because what Savory called holism, Stan talked about as it was economics. And if you think about the word economics, econ, and I can't remember which one's which, if it's Latin or Greek. I, I think I think econ is Latin for it means home, and economics means the study of your home, uh, which includes people, it includes land, it includes animals, it includes money. But then think about the word ecos in Greek. Ecos in Greek means home, and ology means the study of. So ecos is the root word for ecology. Ecology means the study of home. One is Greek and one is Latin, but it's the same thing. Ecology and economics, same stinking thing. Um, and so instead of the economics guy talking about money and the animal science guy talking about animal science and the range guy talking about plants and nobody talking about people, uh, both ranching for profit and holistic management were the only things I'd come across that made any sense at all. I got on with the university as a in cooperative extension. Half my job was research and half was teaching. And I after attending ranching for profit, it kind of ruined me. It really ruined my career with the university because I took that stuff and I started researching its application in California. How do you do this? And does it work? And the findings that my colleagues and I were coming up with were 180 degrees opposite what the university had been recommending for generations. And it was not politically, that was not a very smart thing for me to have done. Um, but it really kind of made me a short timer with the university. And when Stan decided to retire, he asked me if I would step in and run the company. And after running it for a year, he asked me if Kathy and I would like to buy it. And so we went into debt up to our eyeballs and beyond and bought it. We ran it for 20 years. And then we sold it to one of our instructors. And anyway, if I'd known how much fun retirement was going to be, I would have figured out a way to do it 5 years earlier. So
Let
anyway,
me, this was not on our questions for for tonight, Dave, but I'm curious, 20 years of working with producers, what was your favorite part?
you know, We do two things. We do, I still refer to it as a we, even though I'm no longer formally part of the organization. I love what they do, and it doesn't feel right to call it a they. I still feel like part of the team. Uh, I love doing the school because I like knowing what's going to happen next, and I've I've taught it more than any other instructor the company ever had. Um, and you pretty much know what kind of questions are going to come up, and you know how to guide the conversation to get to the result you want. And there's the aha moment. The aha moment for any teacher is a lot of fun. You know, when you see that, you just see the light bulb come on in somebody's eyes that I've got it. But what was really fun is the piece that used to really intimidate me. Because the second thing, the Ranching for Profit School is a business school for ranchers. It's based on the idea that just because you know how to raise a cow doesn't mean you know how to run a business that raises cows. So it's a business school. The second thing the company does is called Executive Link. And Executive Link is based on two concepts. And the first one is that when you're self-employed, you work for a lunatic. And the reason you work for a lunatic is because nobody holds you accountable. You work on the things you're good at and the things you enjoy doing. But sometimes those aren't the things that need to be done. You know, this is the pot calling the kettle black. Kettle black. I don't particularly like going to the bank. But back in the day, there were some short-term investments, 6-month CDs and things like that, that had a reasonable interest rate on them. And our income happens the way most ranchers' income happens. It happens in a very short period of time. Most producers are going to the school this time of year. So from December to February, we'd get about 75% of our income. And then I'd hang on to it and we'd meet our expenses and it would get smaller and smaller and smaller, that amount of money until the end of the year. And then hopefully we'd get another wad and we'd ride that down. Well, I knew better than that. If we took some of that money and put it in some of these short-term investments, we could earn good money on the interest. Well, I don't like going to the bank. So I put that off and I put it off and I put it off and I put it off. Finally, after 3 years of procrastinating, I went to the bank, and that year I think we earned something like $8,000 on the interest. It took an hour. I earned $8,000 in one stinking hour. What was I doing in any of those hours where I'd been procrastinating that was worth more than $8,000 an hour? Anybody who would let their employee get away with that is a lunatic. Don't you agree?
Stories striking too close to
Yeah.
home.
Well, don't be. You mean I'm talking to a lunatic? Cool.
Yeah. Well,
So
people
anyway,
in the webinar, they know.
but the issue is nobody's holding us accountable. Nobody holds us accountable. So the second thing, answer me this: whose problem is it easier to solve, yours or your neighbors?
Neighbors.
Yeah, it's always the neighbors. I can see their problem more clearly. I'm not the one that made 20 years of things that led to the crisis that they're in now. I'm not the one that has to implement the solution. So it's easy for me to be objective and to see. So what we do in Executive Link is we organize alumni of the school into peer advisory boards. And those boards look inside your business. They give you the objective viewpoint and suggest a course of action. You're ultimately responsible for making your own plan, but they advise you on building that plan. And these boards meet 3 times a year. So each time they meet, they begin by checking on your progress relative to what you said you were going to do. So now you're accountable to somebody. And the average profitability of these boards, the average profitability in ranching is negative 1.5% return on assets. The average return on profitability in the Executive Link is 4.2% positive return on assets. It doesn't take much to have a business that's worth a few $1,000,000. Let's say you've got a business that's worth, well, for every $1,000,000, that's, what is that? That's a $40,000 return for every $1,000,000 you have invested. Am I wrong on that?
Nope, that's right. 45,000, 4.5%.
Something like that. So, a 10 million business, it's $450,000 impact each year, every year. So that's what EL is. It's about accountability and about the objective input. And my favorite part, I used to be intimidated by the EL because I could go to the school and I could tell these guys stuff and you'd have the aha moments. And it's like, well, he knows, everybody'd think I knew something. But then I'd go to the EL and I had this image that all these guys knew more than I did because they were actually doing it. I learned so much more Once I got involved with Executive Link, I think it made my teaching at the school so much more impactful because I wasn't telling theory and concept. I was telling this, I was showing results. This is how these guys did it. The way you're going to do it's going to be different, but this is how these guys did it. This is where they started. This is where they end. And then we have a whole bunch of videos that I shot over the years at the EL of people talking about how they did things, and that's become part of the curriculum now too. But Executive Link was my favorite part of the company because that's where you saw the big results. The other thing that was really fun, uh, and this isn't just blowing smoke to kiss up to Canadians. My favorite part of it was working with Canadian producers. And I don't think it's anything about crossing the border. I think it's just getting into an environment where winters are miserable because you're incentivized to find you don't come to this thing to sit there in some sort of theoretical exercise or to brag about conception rates or weaning weights or any of this stuff. You're coming to find a way to make things different, to improve things, as opposed to being from Texas, where winters aren't so severe. And you know what? It's okay to go feed those cows. It's kind of fun to feed those cows in the winter. They come trotting out and they like me, and it's not too cold. But in Canada, in some environments, you're talking about a life-threatening situation to go out and feed those cows. Um, and so the implementation rate of people in Canada uh, was way higher than the further south you go, the lower the implementation rate. The further north you go, the higher the implementation rate, and that makes it so much more fun for an instructor to know that these people are actually going to go home and do something with this. So that was fun.
Oh, great tangent, Dave. I have so much to add. However, for time, let's dive into some of these questions if that works for you.
Sure.
Okay, so as I told you guys, we're doing it a little bit different structure tonight. So we're gonna kind of break it into four segments, just kind of how I saw fit to summarize them. So first topic, we're addressing producers that are just starting out. So question number one, Dave, is suggestion on the type of livestock to be investing in for somebody that's just starting farming or trying to build equity in a cattle operation.
I'm going to share my screen. I prepared some stuff earlier today that I think might be useful. There were three questions that people had in this. First was, what type of livestock should you be investing in? The second was, with the current price of land, is expansion with cows possible? And the last one was investing in equipment, starting with nothing. There's two places in a business where we put money. One is fixed assets. The other one is working capital. Simply put, fixed assets are things you intend to keep. Working capital, those are the things you intend to sell. So when you think about fixed assets, machinery, vehicles, land, any kind of improvement, water, fences, infrastructure development, backhoes, combines, that's all fixed assets. Cows are fixed assets. Just ask yourself this question if you don't think that's true. Do I hope that they're all dry and empty this year so I get to cull them this year? Or do you hope that they're all wet and pregnant so you get to keep them? You hope you get to keep them. So cows are fixed assets too. Now, working capital, that would be the calf crop. That would be and the inputs that go into the calf crop. Now, the question now becomes, where is most of your money? And this is critical. This isn't just about startups. It's most critical for startups, but this is leading us to the biggest financial problem in all of agriculture, not just ranching, but all of agriculture. Where's most of your money? Well, for most of us, 80%, 90%, maybe 95% is tied up in fixed assets. And that's a problem. And it's a problem for two reasons. When most of your money is tied up in the things you intend to keep, you don't have anything left to sell. And the second part of it is a little bit of money you do generate from that small piece of working capital you have almost all of that money gets sucked up maintaining those things you intend to keep because they're expensive. We got insurance payments, they depreciate. We got to repair them. We got to maintain them. We got interest payments we're making if we borrowed money to get them. And this becomes the biggest problem we face in agriculture. The old saying is we're wealthy on the balance sheet and broke at the bank, and this is why. Yeah, that's not news to you that we're fine, cash rich and or land rich and cash poor, but this is an explanation as to why that happens. Now, conventional thinking. One thing you're going to find out about me, Joe, is I don't give yes and no answers very often. I got to give a preamble to set the context here. Conventional thinking is an asset is something you have. Some people say it's something you own, but you don't really, if you're making a mortgage payment, you don't own the land. You have the land, you have some equity in it, but the bank owns some of it too. So an asset is something of value that you have. A liability is something that you owe. That's conventional wisdom. Robert Kiyosaki wrote a couple of books that challenge your thinking on some of these things. Cash Flow Quadrant is one. One that this comes out of is a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, probably the one he's better known for. He says to him, an asset is something that puts money in my pocket, and a liability is something that takes money out of my pocket. So when you think about things that the banker would consider an asset, a tractor, right? Does that tractor put money in your pocket or does it take money out of your pocket? I'm making an interest payment on it. It's depreciating. I got repairs and maintenance. It's sucking up fuel. How about your home? Now, I'm not saying you ought not own a tractor or you ought not own a home, but when you think about your home, most of us think of that as our biggest asset. Kiyosaki would call it a liability. I'm making a mortgage payment. I've got repairs to make. I've got all sorts of costs, and I've got property taxes. The challenge here is to take these things what Kiyosaki is saying is that most fixed assets are liabilities in his way of thinking. They're expensive. So the challenge here, especially when you're starting out, is figure out how can I do this without owning stuff that doesn't produce income. John Haskell is an alumnus of the school. He's been through a couple times. He runs a business called Ranch Right I think he's in Wyoming. But he and I sat down and I did a little interview with him, and I put together I put together several videos of our conversation. This one is talking about what he calls an asset ladder. It's about 3 minutes long. It's particularly relevant if you're starting up, but I think it's something that I think there's something to be gleaned for everybody in every stage of ranch development here. So I thought I'd play that for you. This is John Haskell talking about his asset ladder.
So this is my asset ladder. When we are starting out in business, usually when we are young, we have nothing but, time and exuberance. And we want to build a business that leverages that. One of the big mistakes people get in is they do business out of order. And I'm going to explain that a little bit. The most important thing to the survival of a business is cash flow. Cash is what pays the bills. Cash is what feeds your family. Cash is what, makes things move. Cash in motion is the most important thing you have in a new business or for a young family, any of those things. Think of that as an early life stage. We have to get the cash. So businesses that I call cash cow businesses, so that's primarily the application of labor and skill to generate income. Custom grazing is the perfect example of that. Most people have the aspiration to buy or own a ranch or to own a herd of cattle. And what I like to do is walk through a progression of once you are generating good cash flow, then you use the excess from that cash cow business to buy assets. Over time, those assets will generate cash flow, and you want to always be focused on buying cash flow producing assets. So buying a tractor doesn't count. Buying a profitable cow, buying a profitable ewe does. If you have a custom grazing business, you have a fairly small margin, but you do have a margin. If you invest those proceeds into ewes, as an example, or nannies, which you can buy for a couple $100 for a good quality one, she will continue to generate cash flow. Importantly, she generates cash flow slower than custom grazing. When I had custom grazing customers, I was billing them monthly, so I had cash flow every month. A ewe might bring me cash 2, maybe 3 times a year. Maybe 1 time a year. It's a small asset It generates cash flow, but it does so slower. But that is a more passive asset, if you will. The U is doing a lot of the work, okay? From there, we often move into buying something like a heifer or a cow, where now we have a cow that's doing the work, okay? We're buying a female animal who's going to generate income for us as we go. In the first business, custom grazing, we had no assets. If we buy some ewes, we have a very small, very low cost asset that produces cash flow. We buy a cow, we have a bigger, slightly more expensive, also cash flow producing asset. This assumes that we're running a profitable cash flowing business. When we get to the point of buying a huge asset like land, we need to have smaller, higher turnover assets that are going to fund the purchase of that land, because you are not going to fund the purchase of that land by renting it. If the rent return is, somewhere in the 0.5% to 3% range on the purchase price of that land, that's not going to pay for itself. Where we get in trouble is we jump forward a step. If the neighbor's place comes up for sale, we say that's never going to happen again in our lifetime. We have to take advantage of it. Saddle ourselves with a huge asset and usually a bunch of debt that comes with it. And we're not able to generate enough cash. When we buy land out of the proceeds from an established profitable cow herd, the cow herd buys the land. Whenever I talk about or think about debt, I break the debt into two pieces. There are two very important parts of debt. One is risk and the other is service. There is always risk in debt. Things go wrong, accidents happen. We all know about those. But the other part is actually making the payment. I am willing to take the risk or I'm willing to take the payment. I don't want both sides. If I take both of those, I've absorbed all of the risk and all of the responsibility for the payment. If the cows will make the payment, then all I have to do is live with the risk. I don't have to actually make the payment. The cows make the payment. As we've talked about before, land is an excellent store of wealth for the wealthy. It is not a good store of wealth for the poor. Right? It requires cash input to pay the mortgage primarily, to purchase it. If you are starting out in any type of business, but especially in ranching, do not put your money into things that don't produce significant cash flow right out of the gate. Do not buy land first. Build a very successful business that will buy land for you.
Should give John a shout out too. He's got an excellent podcast called Ranchonomics that I have been absolutely hammering through over this winter. And it's nice to put a face to a name. That is not how I pictured him.
Whoops, that's not going well. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think John is absolutely brilliant. How come from beginning, current slide? All right, Dave, come on. Is that where it goes? How come I can't get, there we go. Let's get rid of that. That's what I wanted to show you. Yeah, John is brilliant. So this is John's asset ladder summarized here. All right. Let's get that back out of my way. A startup business using labor and skill to produce cash flow, custom grazing. And how come the rest of it's not? There we go. The second rung, use the surplus cash from that cash flow generating enterprise like custom grazing to buy income generating assets like stockers. You could say cows, but the turnover in a stocker, in a steer is 4 to 6 months, whereas in a cow, it might be a year. If you're buying heifers, it might be 18 months before you see that first. It might be 2 years before you see your first paycheck. And then finally, buying land, because land is a great place to store wealth. It's a good place to park money, pretty safe place to park money usually. But it's not a great place to put money when you're starting out. There's a TV show in the States called Going from Broke. And it's usually about people who get into debt on whether it's small business or personal debt. And it gives them a coach to help them find their way out of it. Well, there's a guy I know, they wanted to do a show on ranching. And there's a guy in Wyoming who's actually a pretty well-known guy, who volunteered to be on the show. And his thing was young, exuberant, started a custom grazing business, started buying animals, just the same thing John was talking about. But then he bought land. His dream was to ranch, and to him that meant owning a ranch. You don't have to own land to ranch, but to him that meant owning a ranch. So he prematurely bought a property which sucked up all of his money, took all his excess cash flow, and then his business had a production hit, and it was unable to withstand that, and he was going to go broke. He was going to lose it all. We found out a way. We structured a plan to get him out of it, which included selling all of his land, and pretty much starting from scratch again. But it's better than what was about to happen. And in about 10 years, he'll probably be at a point where he can buy land. But so many people do that prematurely, lock up all of their cash flow, and it's a train wreck waiting to happen. Couple other things on this, and if people have questions about this, we can dig into it. But we do have a lot of ground to cover today. There was the other questions. With the current price of land, is expansion possible with cows? I want to make it absolutely clear to y'all that land and livestock are two completely separate entities. There's the livestock business and the land investment. And where we start to get in trouble, I'm going to stop the share here. Where we start to get ourselves in trouble is when we mix the two and we forget that there's that separation. Whether you own land or not, your livestock business must rent it from your land investment. They've got to do that. Let's say that you do that. You charge market rate rent to your cows for the land that you own. And if you're profitable doing that, what does it tell you? I should go out and rent the neighbors. But if I don't do that, I don't know that. And then we get into succession issues and family issues. And maybe I own the land with my brother or my sister. And I'm the one that's running the operating business. Well, what do they get out of it? Well, they should get half the rent. I get half the rent, they get half the rent. But it's the only way to know, are the livestock subsidizing the land, or is the land subsidizing the livestock? And I have seen situations, one of the things people know is impossible to do these days is to cash flow the purchase of land from livestock operations. And yet I know people who are doing it. They're usually fabulous grazers. I'm thinking of one particularly in Texas, who has tripled the carrying capacity of his property over the last 10 years. And he is cash flowing the purchase of that land from the grazing on that land. What John was talking about is that it's possible for this grazing operation over here to be profitable enough to use the income from this to buy this piece of land over here. That's not what this guy's doing. This guy is buying the land that the livestock are on from the cash flow from those animals, which everybody knows is impossible to do. That's a stocker operation. The guy's a brilliant marketer, and even more than that, he's a brilliant grass manager. He's moving, using large herds, moving up to 9 times a day. If you've ever been to the Serengeti, it will remind you of that. Animals always moving to fresh feed. And the last thing on the startup question was it was more of a statement than a question. It just said investing in equipment, starting with nothing. There was a client in South Africa who once told me the biggest piece of equipment you need is a wheelbarrow. And that's only if you're crazy about owning equipment. And you might think, yeah, well, they don't have snow like we do in South Africa. And you're right. But you know what? You don't have to have snow either, believe it or not. You don't have to have a year-round operation. You could do a seasonal operation and not have snow. And we may get talking more about that. But so when it comes to equipment, I'm looking for, if I do need equipment, I'm going to lease it before I own it, or I'm going to custom hire it before I own it. The last thing I want to do is make a capital investment in stuff that is not going to produce income. If I am going to buy equipment, I'm going to have that equipment produce income by going out and starting a custom farming business, or a custom tillage business, or whatever it might be, custom haying, I am going to get, if it's not me, I'm going to get, and preferably it's not going to be you, it's going to be somebody you hire to get their butt on that equipment and be using it to produce income. That's the only justification on a farm to own equipment, especially if you're working at a reasonably small scale. And what I mean by a reasonably small scale is if there are, if that equipment could be used 30% more than you're using it for yourself. If there are other places where that thing could be, that equipment could be getting used, you got to do it. Otherwise, it's, and we get into the same thing here, where if you own the equipment, you actually have another business. You have the equipment business and you have the your farming business, and your farming business has to contract with your equipment business. So you're custom farming anyway, even if you own the equipment. But now you have to go out and get some other clients. So
that is one thing I realized when Trav and I started up Covers and Co. when I didn't have any time, so I was forced to value my time. Starting to pencil out custom rates and figuring out what our actual cost was before and what our custom rates are now. Basically, I was doing it for the same price or the same cost investment, plus I get my time back, which is
yeah.
the most valuable resource of all.
Yeah, it is. And most people don't do that. Most people just say, well, my profit, if I make a profit, will be my salary. You've got to pay yourself what it would cost to replace yourself. And most people think, well, that's crazy. I can't afford to do that. Well, tough. You got to do it anyway. You've heard the phrase sweat equity, which is nonsense. There's no such thing as sweat equity. Let's call it what it really is. It's really deferred wages. Deferred wages that we'll probably never seriously pay our kids, or that our folks will ever seriously pay us. And the problem with sweat equity is we never quantify it. And so when I'm the one that's doing the sweating, I inflate the value of my sweat. Well, someday this is all going to be mine. Meanwhile, my sister and brother who live in town and grew up on the place and remember those wonderful childhood they had and think I'm living the dream, they're diminishing the value of my sweat. And so the only one that makes any money out of this is going to be the lawyers that wind up coming in to settle the estate. So let's call sweat equity what it really is. Let's get rid of the term sweat equity and call it deferred wages. And let's quantify it, say, here's what you should be getting paid. Here's the interest we're going to charge on what we are not paying you. And here is the time when we think we can start making those payments. Maybe it will be maybe it'll be part of inheritance. But to avoid the legal fights, we need to quantify what that is.
I heard you on a Working Cows podcast this week, and I wrote that down because that is a term that I have used and need to remove from my vocabulary.
By the way, there is Ranching for Profit on the website, which is just ranchingforprofit.com, has a YouTube channel. And there's, I don't know, 50 or 60 short videos. And when I say short, they're between a minute and a half. And I think the longest one might be 8 minutes. But 50 or 60 videos of me yakking about different stuff. There is one on sweat equity. There is one on how to figure out what you ought to be paying yourself. And pretty much most of the stuff we'll probably get into tonight is there in a YouTube video, and it's all available for free. So,
well, let's, for the sake of time, because we are running out of it, let's keep moving on, Dave, to the second topic, which is profitability, which is probably the most asked questions of the people that are on tonight. So you had a very short answer to this one, but hoping you want to elaborate on it. So lots of people wondering, and I think there was a question in there tonight, least and most profitable enterprises feedback, I guess.
okay. I'm going to hijack it for just a second because the first question really first series of questions had to do with finance. This is about economics. Most people don't realize there's a distinction between those two things. There's a critical distinction, and it boils down to there's one economic question. In honor of you guys, I actually have a big piece of money.
That's right? A $60 US bill.
Yeah. So I have let's say I have $100,000. All I have to do is add some zeros to this, and zero is nothing. So this might as well be $100,000. At the end of the year, it produces $200,000. Is that a profitable thing to do?
Yes.
Okay, good. I was afraid you weren't going to say anything. I think maybe that's part of our problem. We don't recognize a good deal when we see it. This is a really good deal. Should I do it? Yeah, it's profitable. And that's economics. Economics is the question of, is it profitable, or should I do this thing? And the answer is yeah, in this case. So if that's economics, then what's finance? Finance is, okay, but where am I going to come up with $100,000? How can I get this thing started? And if I do get the 100,000, I go borrow it from a bank. So I found the 100,000, or maybe I sell a piece of equipment or whatever it might be, but I raised the $100,000. But if this $200,000 happens at the end of the year, how do I pay my bills in the meantime? That's finance. So economics is the question of, should I do it? Finance is the question of, can I do it? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'd like the listeners to think about for just a minute, which of those two questions comes first?
Oh, the economics. Is this
Well,
good?
some people want to debate that. So let's take this example. Let's look at the economics of this. I start out with $100,000. By the end of the year, I've turned it into $10,000. I've lost $90,000. Do you want to do that?
No.
Do I have to worry about where the $100,000 is going to come from so I can lose 90 of it? No. So you're right. Economics always comes first. I gave this example the other day of $100,000 to $10,000, losing 90 of it. And a guy in the audience said, yep, we're ranching now. Anyway, so that's economics versus finance. Economics, we started with finance tonight, but economics always comes first. I'm going to go share my screen again real quick.
You betcha.
Don't die on me.
Well, I'm actually improving, believe it or not, Dave.
I was going to say something kind of snarky, but I won't. No, I can't resist. Somebody told me the other day that better than bad doesn't mean it's good. So
No, I'm improving.
So what's been the least profitable enterprise? I don't. Okay, I'm gonna be a little snarky here. I don't know why that's important. But and there were three options: cow, calf, hay, and stocker in the question. I've seen all of them be really, really, really unprofitable. But I've also seen all of them be really, really, really profitable. And it really boils down to, does the enterprise fit the environment you're in, and is it managed well? If you want the enterprises that typically have the highest gross margin, in other words, the highest economic efficiency, those are usually sheep and goat enterprises. But I've seen just about any enterprise you can imagine be really, really profitable, and I've seen them be really, really unprofitable. So it really boils down to where are you and how is it structured, and are you a decent manager? The second question was, I think it's also what's the most profitable enterprise is a good question to be asking too.
Yeah.
I wanted to get into this a little bit, Joe. There was a question about somebody asked, where is it? In a market like this, should we still be concerned with depreciation in a cow herd, or should we just keep getting calves out of her? Well, if you can keep getting calves out of her, that's great. But the problem is we don't get all that many calves out of them. I'd like you to ask yourselves, those of you who've been through ranching for profit know the answer to this, but how many calves do you think that the typical cow has in her lifetime? Because most people get that wrong. Let's pretend.
Can I guess? I have not been through the school planning.
Why don't you write it down on a piece of paper, and then you can show me.
Sure.
And I'll give you a clue. There was a guy at the University of Nebraska that wrote a paper. Ag economist wrote a paper, and he based it on the average cow having 11 calves in her lifetime. And I'll tell you something. The answer is not 11. Keep it to yourself for a minute.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So 100 pregnant cows. Will they also, this is at the beginning of the year. They've been confirmed pregnant. January 1, here they are, 100 cows. Will they all survive and be there at the end of the year?
Of course not.
No. A couple of them are going to die. By the way, every number I'm using in here is wrong, right? It's going to be close enough. That leaves us with 98. 98 pregnant cows. Will they all wean a calf? What proportion do you think will not wean a calf?
Like from death loss at birth right till weaning?
Yeah,
10%. No, 7%.
I put 5. All right. Like I said, every number is wrong. 5% will be dry. That leaves, so we'll truck them and away they go. That leaves us with 93 weaned calves, 93 cows that weaned calves. Now, we're going to cull some, and this is not culling for reproductive performance. This is she's too big, she's too ugly, she's too old, she's got a bat bag, she chased me out of the corral once too often, whatever it might be. All right. And I said 5%. Some people say, well, I only cull 1%. But to me, if you're only culling 1 or 2%, you've probably got a pretty crappy cow herd because you're not putting enough selection pressure on them. So anyway, we're going to cull 5%. That's going to leave us with 88 that got exposed and that we kept. Now, just because they got exposed didn't mean they got pregnant. So what's a decent conception rate for your parts?
Are we doing 60 days?
Sure.
93.
93. I used 91. Close enough for now. All right. So 9% were open. And the reason I did that is because it makes the math easy. All right. So if 9% were open, that's 8% I'm trucking away. I had 80 that were pregnant and kept. If I want to keep the herd at 100, how many pregnant replacements do I need to bring in?
Pregnant replacements? Well,
Yep.
20.
I need 20 pregnant replacements to maintain my herd at 100 cows. So let's see what the significance of that is. If my replacement rate is 20%, 100 pregnant cows, 20% replacement rate means I had 80 cows left at the end of the first year. Replacement rate of 20% at the end of the second year, there's 16 cows that are gonna get gone during the second year. That leaves me with 64 of those original 100 left at the end of the second year. Now, at the end of the third year, I lost another 20%. That's 13 more. That means I have 51 of my original 100 cows. So the average cow has 3 calves in her lifetime. How'd you do, Joe?
I was high. I said 4.
Well, you're only off by 33%. So I won't. Now, let's look at the significance of that. I just pulled these numbers out of I got online this morning and looked at some numbers. So I hope these are in the ballpark. If a pregnant replacement is going to cost me $4,500, and the salvage value of that animal when she's open is going to be about $2,500, that means the total depreciation on a Canadian cow is $2,000 in her lifetime. Let's take the total depreciation and divide by the number of calves she has in her lifetime. That'll give us the annual depreciation. $2,000 divided by the 3 calves, that's $667 per cow per year. Every single stinking cow, every single stinking year is costing $667. So you answer me the question, in a market like this, and this is for this market we're currently in, should we be concerned about depreciation in our cow herd?
Of
To
course.
me, 667. You know what? I don't know how to make that cow profitable. I'm not smart enough to figure out how to make that cow that's having $667 of depreciation go out of her each year. I don't know how to make that cow profitable. I am smart enough to know how to eliminate depreciation in a cow herd. And that's where all the money, and people look at the cow calf business. You know what the most profitable part of the cow calf business is? It's the cull cow business. The cull cow business is the business of taking this depreciation and eliminating it, so you don't have to suffer that cost. So cow depreciation, $667 a year right now. Now, when cattle prices go down, this number will get smaller. It'll probably go down in a terrible market. It might go down to as low as $450. Now, there are 4 ways you can reduce or eliminate depreciation in a cow herd, and they're all on this graph. Hate to put you on the spot, Joe. Can you see any of them?
To reduce depreciation?
to reduce depreciation.
Well, you got to sell her at some point when she hasn't depreciated.
What if you sold them when as a C4, right? Before she became 5 or 6 years old. Sell them. Well, let's go back to your first suggestion, right? You said 4 calves.
Yep.
What if we took that $2,000 of depreciation and instead of dividing it by 3, divided it by 4?
It would be less.
It would be $500 a year. So we just saved $167 of depreciation. Now the question becomes, what's it going to cost us to get that extra calf? Are we going to push more feed to them? Are we going to push $167 more feed to them to get that extra year? I can guarantee you will not get the 5th year. I mean, you could, but it's going to be so bloody expensive to do that. You can get a 5th calf, you can get a 6th calf, but the cost of doing that for the average is going to be so bloody high. I've never seen a profitable business be able to do that, especially if they're raising their own replacements. Because as you can imagine, which is the animal that's going to be most likely to be open?
The oldest one.
Or
the youngest one.
The H2.
Yeah.
The H2. She's trying to grow. She's still lactating. She's trying to get pregnant for a second time. And so this is front loaded. Those animals are falling out faster. So one is to increase the longevity, but that's got limited potential. The second one.
Dave, can I interrupt you? Sorry, I just want to come back to that point. Sure. Because you don't know it yet, but in my part, I want to touch on this, but isn't that the best time then? Because your depreciation is that she has depreciated. She's not worth what a cull cow is. Therefore, her depreciation will be less.
For who? For the H2?
And H2.
Well, what's she going to cost me? She's going to cost me $4,500, maybe $5,000 to buy.
Yep.
Okay. And what am I going to sell that open animal for? 3,000? 3,500?
Yep.
Okay, so if I sell her for 3,500, she's depreciated either $1,000 or $1,500 in that first year. So if you can make that work somehow, sure, but I don't know how to make that work.
So
that might be. So let's go through these and then let's take some questions. So add value to the culls. One way to do that would be to sell them before they depreciate, right? To sell that cow when she's 5 years old, say. Another way would be to hold on to her until the market rises, because if you ever watch the cull market cycle, it's much more predictable than any other thing you look at. So you might hold her for a couple of months. You might put some weight on her. You might get her pregnant. She's going to fit somebody's breeding season or somebody's calving season somewhere, even if it's not your area. Another one is to cheapen up the front end, which means maybe our replacement. Can you see when I move my mouse on this thing?
Yep, we got you.
So maybe my replacements come here. Or maybe my replacements are that open H2 for somebody else. That's going to work for me if I'm calving. If everybody else is calving in March and April and I'm calving in June, then that animal might be my best replacement right there. But it's probably going to mean that especially if I'm working at a limited scale, and to me that means less than 400 cows. If I'm working at a limited scale, I really have to question whether I ought to be raising my own replacement heifers. Remember, we don't need replacement heifers. We need replacement cows. Raising a replacement heifer is one way to get a replacement cow, but there are others. That open H2 that already took that $1,500 depreciation hit that I don't have to mess with anymore. I know how to make money with that animal. And maybe these animals in here that have depreciated $1,000 or $2,000, they have a couple more calves left in them. They just skipped a year. And so, especially if I'm calving a little later than other people, then that might be a way to go. And the last one is, well, to sell them before they turn 5. So to sell those cows before they depreciate, to add value to the culls, to cheapen up the replacements, remembering we don't need heifers, we need replacement cows, and to increase the longevity. Those are the things you can do to eliminate depreciation. Now, Joe, you had a question you wanted to bring up or challenge that?
I have so many questions, Dave, but I promise you I'm looking forward to when I kind of present my idea from my farm. We can dive into that too. And just to be cognizant for time, let's keep rolling if you don't mind.
Okay. There's really one other thing I wanted to do with, I've got a lot more stuff prepared we could get into, but there's one big thing that I wanted to bring in that I think this type of question comes up a lot. And I think I shouldn't say that the question is dangerous, but I think the mindset that leads to this, or the paradigm that leads to this question, is suspect to me. That I think it's coming from a place of, um, I had a guy tell me once, ranching for profit's an oxymoron. So I said, okay, today we're going to talk about ranching for less loss. And he was fine with that. And so, if ranching for profit is too aggressive for you, just think ranching for less loss, and maybe we can get to ranching for breaking even, and maybe even later ranching for profit. But I think that this question comes from the ranching for less loss paradigm, from a paradigm that ranching can't be profitable. I don't want to get into all the detail here, but if you grow hay, so the question was, should I still buy hay if it's higher than my cost of production because it's importing nutrients? Well, first of all, you shouldn't need to import nutrients from somebody else's hay. If you're doing a decent job of grazing, you ought to be building organic matter and increasing the fertility of your soils naturally without having to do that. But if we take a look at this, the gross product, the way you calculate profit is we calculate gross product, which is really simple. All it is the closing inventory value of your animals minus your beginning inventory value plus your sales minus your replacement costs. That's what gross product is. It's a measure of the total value an enterprise produces. We subtract from that the direct costs. Those are the costs that increase directly as the number of units increase or decrease, the number of cows increase or decreases. That gives us what we call gross margin. I've given the livestock division up here two enterprises. I've given a cow enterprise and a stock enterprise. And we would calculate gross margins for both of those. We would add the two together. That gives us a division gross margin. And then we'd subtract what we call division overheads. Division overheads are those overheads that I would lose completely if I didn't have any cattle. All right, if I didn't have any livestock, I wouldn't have those overheads. So my stock trailer wouldn't need that. If I have a hired man who only works with cows, he wouldn't know how to harvest a hay crop if his life depended on it. So if I didn't have cows, I'd lay him off. His salary would be a divisional overhead. Any horses I have, those would be divisional overheads. Now, then we have our hay enterprise. If you grow hay, you have a farming division and at least one enterprise in that division. We could have more. Hay has a gross product too. All it is if I have closing inventory of my hay and opening inventory, it's the closing minus the opening, plus whatever I sold. You wouldn't be purchasing, the hay enterprise wouldn't be purchasing hay, so it'd just be what you sold minus the change in inventory, or plus the change in inventory. Subtract the direct costs. That's going to be seed, fertilizer, twine, things like that. That gives you your gross margin. Now there's going to be some overheads with the hay. You're going to, if you own equipment, you're going to have repair and maintenance on that equipment, depreciation, interest payments on the equipment. You calculate division profit or loss. You add the two division profit or losses together, subtract the business overheads. Those are the overheads that you would have even if I got rid of livestock, I still have myself. I probably still have a pickup truck. Those are the overheads that I would have regardless of what enterprises I have. So from the division profit or loss added together, we subtract the business overheads and we get business profit or loss. The farming division is selling hay to the livestock division. And the livestock and what should the price be that the farm division sells that hay for? Would it cost to grow it? Or should it cost what I could have gotten paid if I sold it to somebody else? It has to sell it to my cows for what I could have sold it to somebody else. And so this question about if my cost of production if it costs more to buy hay than my cost of production, It's an irrelevant question. And I hate to be rude. Well, maybe I don't hate, maybe I'm on a power trip and I like being rude. I am an American. Um, but the question is the hay enterprise profitable? If I sell it at market price, my cost of production had better be lower than what I can buy it for from somebody else, because there has to be a margin in the hay enterprise that makes it worth doing. And if the hay enterprise can't cover its overheads and produce profit beyond that, selling it to my livestock enterprise at the market value, then I ought to get rid of the hay. And I ought to be buying it from somebody else. I want to go a step further on that. There's a question we ask at the school. We try to ask it every day. What's impossible to do, but if it were done, if it were possible and you could do it, it would be a breakthrough. What do we mean by breakthrough? We mean a big permanent change for the better in your business. All right. So we ask people to answer that every day. What's impossible? And a lot of people struggle with that. I never struggled with that for my company. I always could come up with 100 things that were impossible to do, but if you could do them, it'd be great. Could we make more money by doing less work? And I'll tell you what, if there's one thing that almost every alumnus does after the school, is that one right there. They find that one or two things on the place aren't working, and just discontinuing them, preventing that loss, and taking the resources that were used for those and putting them into the things that were making money is a way to work less and make more. Buying land from livestock production, we know that's impossible. Starting a business at the peak of the peak of the cattle cycle, we can't do that, of course. Pay ourselves a competitive salary. Increase our numbers to 500 cows within 3 years. That doesn't seem possible. How about eliminating hay? For a lot of people, that doesn't seem possible. But if we start taking a look at these things, like eliminating hay, well, if we were to eliminate hay, how could somebody do that? Well, going seasonal would be one way. And I'm not saying you want to do it. It could be, if your place is profitable, doing it the way you're doing it, then fantastic, keep it up. But if you're not satisfied, if it's not profitable enough, we got to start exploring some of these other things. So let's go seasonal. Maybe stockers, maybe migrate the cows. They're seasonal on my place, but maybe I can find some winter range someplace. Or maybe I shouldn't be owning these cows at all. Maybe I ought to be grazing somebody else's cows. Or winter grazing. Can I stockpile grass during the growing season? And what about my calving season? Is the calving season, if I'm placing peak demand when there's no feed out there, it's just ice and snow, that's pretty tough to make that profitable. But if I were to calve in May or late May or June, would I be able to stockpile enough feed to be able to graze through the winter with a minimal amount of hay? Because the problem with feeding hay is not the cost of the hay, it's the cost of the feed. It's not the cost of the feed, it's the cost of the feeding. You know, hay is expensive enough, but now if I'm going to feed it to my cows, it's not just the cost of the hay. I have to have the equipment and the facilities and the labor to feed it. And that's expensive and it's exhausting.
According to the Manitoba Agriculture Cost of Production Budget, which if you watch the webinar, I reference a lot, it doubles your cost of feed. Half your feed cost is sitting in the feed pile. The other half is distribution.
That's about right. That sounds spot on. Do we have time for me to tackle this last question, the easiest input to reduce?
Absolutely.
Okay. So this is the way we look at profit. Profit, if you take your total gross margin, subtract overheads, that's what profit is. So if profit's a problem, it's either gross margin or overheads. But there's two numbers inside gross margin. There's the gross margin per unit, and that measures the economic efficiency of production. And there's a gross margin per unit for the stockers and for the cows and for the hay and the wheat and whatever you might do. And turnover is the volume of the business. And there's two aspects to turnover. One is the number of units. With farming, we look at number of acres. With livestock, we look at the number of animal units. And there's the enterprise mix. Gross margin per unit, we get gross product and direct cost. Gross product being the value we produced, the direct cost being the cost directly associated with producing it. Then price and production. Price is two things. It's the market and your marketing. Production in a cow-calf business is reproduction and gain. Direct costs, there aren't very many. Overheads, there's two types of overheads, land and labor. And then land, we have the rent of the land and repair and maintenance. With people or labor, we have two things, people and equipment. Now, The question was, what's the easiest cost to reduce? And I'm going to be snarky about this one too. Sorry for that, but it's an irrelevant question. The question should be, what's the most important cost to reduce? Now, the economists will tell you that these overheads are fixed. They call them fixed cost. I'm sure you've all heard that term, fixed cost. What does the term fixed imply?
It's fixed.
It's
Doesn't
fixed. You
change.
can't change it. Can't change it. We don't use the F word at the Ranching for Profit School. These are not fixed. Overheads can be changed, but to change them, if I'm going to calve in March and April, I'm going to be feeding hay. And that means I'm going to have labor and I'm going to have equipment. If I calve in June, or if I go, let's go custom graze from May to October, would I need to feed hay? That means I don't need the equipment. And those land and labor costs melt away. They disappear. And so if I'm changing the basic structure of my business, either the enterprise mix or the schedule of those enterprises, the production schedule, if I change it appropriately, these overheads are, are so easy to change. In the absence of that deep level of change, though, you just try to change the overhead significantly when I'm calving in March, and it ain't going to happen. It's just not going to happen. Now, overheads account for somewhere between 60 and 80% of the costs in your business. Now, some people might take exception to that. That assumes you're paying rent to your own land. If you own land, you're paying, the livestock are paying rent to it. And that also assumes that you're paying yourself a wage. And the wage you would have to pay to replace all the work that you currently do. And so when we start looking at these overheads, gee whiz, does that mean I have to cut my salary? Or that my land business needs to cheapen up the rent to my livestock business? And the answer on both those things is absolutely no. If I have, let's say I pay myself a $100,000 salary and I have one cow. My cost per cow is $100,000. Well, what if I have 100 cows? All right, that changes the math, doesn't it? All right, so now it's $1,000 per cow. Well, so maybe I need 200 cows or 300 cows or whatever it is to justify that. So there's two ways to get out of this thing with overheads. One is to cut the cost, and the other one is to grow the business. There is a sequence in which we need to do those things. I don't think we have time to get into it tonight. If you want to do this again sometime, we can go into that. But
Love it.
somehow,
Well, if not, I got one hot button topic that we do have to cover, Dave, and
yeah, let's not worry about that.
I'm curious your input because this year, being on the road talking to cattle producers, not that it's the most commonly asked question, but I'm hearing it more than I ever have. In fact, I didn't even really know the term a year ago, but sell-by marketing.
Oh, sure.
So I guess two-parter.
I'll tell you, I'm the wrong guy to talk to about that.
Well, I think the second part of the question will mean you're the exact right guy because we had on Doug Ferguson, and I should have done more research on the topic because I'm sure Doug, it was like talking to a 3-year-old. But something that I found interesting, and I know that producers struggle with, is these calculations of an overvalued cow or an undervalued cow and an overvalued open heifer, undervalued steer, whatever. First and foremost, I guess the question is your thoughts on sell-by, and probably the bigger question is, how do I know if an animal is overvalued or not?
You can't. You can't tell if an animal's overvalued or undervalued until you're able to compare it to another class of stock. It's a comparison thing. It's been so long since I've messed with that stuff. There was a question on here that said in your, let's see, sell-by marketing, how much time resources should be put toward understanding the concept? If you intend to do it, as much time as it takes to really deeply understand it. I've seen people build very successful businesses using this strategy, and most of them have not been startups. Most of them have been people who've been very successful in the livestock business and are looking for a new thing. And this has been really useful for a lot of folks. There are a few startups I've seen do it. It's not really the livestock business. It's more of it's a cattle trading business. It's not about raising livestock. It's about trading livestock. Because there's always something in a market that's overvalued and there's always something that's undervalued. And so you're not in, you might take one turn where you have a bunch of old cows, then you might have heifers, and then you might have young cows, and then you might have steers, and then you might have this class and that class. It's just whatever is working in the market. And I don't have the formula at my fingertips. But if somebody's going to do that, then usually I tell people, if you're going to start an enterprise, start it at scale if you can. I mean, like custom grazing, just get all the cows you can on the place for whatever time you can have them there, and go for it. Don't do a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this other thing. With sell by, I think, and people who use it might disagree with this, but I tend to think it might be better to start on a more limited scale, to start with 20 animals, and that's your trading herd. And when you have established a track record over the course of a couple of years, now I think it's time to pull the trigger and really go large if you can. With sell by, I think one of the things people miss is that you might be looking at a half a dozen or 8 or 10 trades a year. Most people think, well, I'll flip them I get them in the spring, I'll flip them in the fall, and I'll replace them with something, and I'll keep those for 6 months or 9 months. No, this is something that if it's really being done well, you're flipping the animals a lot more frequently than that.
Well, you're flipping the animals when the market tells you to flip the animals.
Exactly. And it might be once every 9 months, one time around, but it might be in 3 weeks too.
Yeah.
And if you're not prepared to do that, it's something to stay away from. But if you're prepared to do that, it can be a really profitable thing to do.
I do really, I'm intrigued by the concept of it, the practicality of it, I mean, for our own farm specifically, all the stakeholders in the farm have off-farm jobs, which is the case on many farms, and trying to figure out how that would work from a practical standpoint.
Yeah. One of the most successful practitioners of it was a fellow, he passed away a while back, but he partnered with a cattle buyer. Well, who better to find out what's undervalued and what's overvalued? They had 1,000 cows in this thing. It was up in northwestern California, and he called it the Calico Cattle Company because it was the weirdest looking group of animals. They were Ayrshire cows and Corriente roping steers and Herefords and Angus and Charolais and whatever you could think, whatever you could put together in a herd was there. But there were truckload lots of everything. And when the market was ready for this, they would go, and here'd come these new things again. Like, what the heck are these? Look like zebras or something. But the buyer's job was to find out what the market was doing and what was undervalued, what was overvalued. And Harold's job was to do the great. Actually, it's how his daughter got involved in his business. She became the grass person in this thing, just making sure everything was gaining weight and performing. So, but it's a great enterprise if you've got the right aptitude. I would never be able to pull it off. I would not find joy in running that enterprise. But some people really embrace the challenge and love doing it. And so I have some friends that have really run with that and done very well with it.
Well, if I ever get the opportunity like you to retire, that will be my retirement, is farming full time and managing a sell by herd. Again, I love the concept, and I'm kind of an analytical person. It speaks to me. The practicality of it, it's tougher, I think. Dave, I think what we're gonna do is apologies to the people watching tonight. We are gonna forego question period because I do want to get to my portion. Like I say, I very rarely prepare for these things, and listening to you for the past week, I do have some things prepared.
One
So
quick question.
yeah,
Roughly how many numbers of, what are we looking at for attendance on this thing?
so we were up to 110. We're down to 93. I'm not sure
Okay.
what you said to offend anyone.
Yeah, oh well, they don't like the American. I had my email on a number of the slides, and I'll tell you right now, just pratt@ranchmanagement.com.
Yep.
And if anybody has a question that they'd like to put to me, you know, I'm retired, but I'm not dead, so I can still type out an email. If you
Cool.
have a question, it might take me some time to get back to it, but I will get back to you. So if you
Cool.
want to shoot me an
Well,
email question, feel free.
this will be posted on YouTube, and maybe we won't put your email on YouTube, but well, if people are watching, they can reach out to you. So, Dave, can I take 10 minutes and explain? This is a Dave Pratt inspired tangent, and to be honest, I think on the webinar tonight, my wife, my brother, and his partner Derek, and my dad are all on. Those are the stakeholders in my farm, and I haven't run this idea past any of them, so they're going to be hearing this for the first time. And honestly, I'm a little bit nervous going through this with you.
Okay.
But I've had a week to prepare for this, and yeah, I'm excited about it. And my last slide is like pick holes in this idea, Dave. But I think I'm gonna have to get you to stop sharing.
I thought I did.
Oh, did you? Yes, you did. Sorry. Can you see that all right?
I see it.
Okay, so this our farm's called Riot Ranch. I went through the stakeholders. Hey guys, if Dave doesn't like this, we probably won't do this. But we're the same as anyone. We calved about 400 cows this past year. We're going to be calving about 300 this upcoming year. But same as every farm in this market, we're wondering: do we expand? Do we reduce? Cash in on equity, keep heifers. Anyway, so after the last week of
Commercial cows?
commercial cows, commercial Angus cows. So we were raised, my parents took the holistic management course in 1995 or six, something like that. So we've been bale grazing, we've been rotational grazing, small to moderate frame cows. So the objective of these changes is to improve fertility, reduce risks, diversifying selling markets and selling times, avoid selling cull cows, capture equity in the cow herd, and create more marketing options. So the concept for our heifers, expose 90% of our heifers to a bull for 21 days, remove the misfits essentially, aim for a 60% bred in 21 days. And this was actually a Working Cows podcast I heard from this past summer. I forget who it was on, but the number one metric to turning a heifer into a profitable cow is when she calves. So the earlier you can have your heifers calve, like you had mentioned earlier, she's got more time to rebreed, and those H2 heifers, it's like they're a higher open rate, and we struggle with our system. That's what we struggle with big time.
And what is your calving season?
We start this year, it'll be about May 10th.
Okay.
We're gonna, on this, I think I had May 1st. Bred heifers enter the cow herd, all calve in first cycle, increasing rebreeding percentage. And the open heifers are to be sold in early fall, which is, I think, a good time to be marketing those animals, and just a time which our farm struggles with cash flow. So the cows, 42-day breeding, again, aiming for a May 1st calving. Pull the bulls after 42 days. So the bulls are pulled for 45 days, then turn back out to breed whatever cows didn't catch in the first cycle. We'll process calves between June 15th and August 1st. That's the gap of when the bulls were pulled. So we know anything that's calved in that time, caught in the first two cycles. Anything that hasn't calved at processing time, we will pull out of the cow herd, and that group will move to be grazed and calved with our heifer group. Fall calving cows to be sold in winter time. So again, trying to avoid selling a cull cow, just adding value and shipping her into a different market. So the cows, I can immediately see holes in this. Once the cows have turned 5 to 6 years old, So that's either 4 or 5 calves. Sell them as bred cows before the asset starts to depreciate significantly. All cows being sold, and I think this is a selling feature, which is quite often our cows, because they're smaller framed, where we farm, get discounted because of their size. But use it as the selling feature that all cows being sold have caught in the first 2 cycles every year, raised a calf on, or calved on their own and raised a calf on their own, and obviously were rebred. So the goal is our current system, we are selling open heifers in the spring and fall, obviously breeding enough for replacements, selling late and open cows also in fall, and sell a cull cow also in the fall, and transition that to selling, rather than selling open heifers in fall, spring, selling yearling heifers or bred heifers, selling late and open cows, turning that into pairs and selling them into winter. And then rather than selling a cull cow, just sell everything at anything that turns the age of 6 or 5. Sell her before depreciation kicks in too hard. So the outcome, what we were hoping for, is to put pressure on the heifers to improve fertility of the cow herd, turn an undervalued late/open cows into better return, and liquidate cows before too much value lost to depreciation. And what I like is kind of the flexibility. So it's like kind of the buy-sell version. If cows are overvalued, or working buy-sell into our system, if cows are overvalued, we can liquidate more cows, invest in open heifers and grassers. If cows are undervalued, and I see I have a spelling mistake there, liquidate heifers and grow the cow herd. So I threw a lot at you, but please, Dave, pick holes in my plan.
From a dyslexic standpoint, typos are welcome. What's your biggest worry about it?
Probably the same concern that everyone has. I fall in love with my cows, and always we have been focused on longevity, and that's just a mindset shift I think that we'll have to make.
Overall, I think it's got more. It's got some good positives. One of the things, missed opportunity to me seems the one cycle on the heifers. The challenge, and I'm absolutely not suggesting that they should be calving even earlier than what you're doing. You're familiar with the work on photoperiod and the impact that has on the postpartum and estrus period and all that?
Enlighten me, please.
Oh, gee whiz. Do you know what your latitude is?
Oh my God, no.
Well, anyway, this becomes less and less important the further south you go. Why are 90% of the caribou born within 7 days of the summer solstice?
Probably grazing, or
You know the answer. What is the summer solstice?
it's
What is
the
the significance of that day?
longest day.
Yeah, more daylight, right? Uh, Animals, and this is true with all ruminant, well, all grazing animals that I'm aware of, horses, sheep, cows, elk, deer, just try to get a deer to breed out of season. It ain't going to happen unless you put them in confinement indoors and adjust the light. And that's how they get sheep to breed out of season. They put them in a barn and adjust the light. That's how they get horses to breed out of season. So photoperiod is a big deal when it comes to the fertility of animals and the cycling of animals. And I could look it up, but it'd take a couple minutes to find it. And if you want to have this conversation privately, I'm happy to do that, and I can show you the data. But at the further north you go, if we were to at my latitude, and I'm way south of you, but at my latitude, if I calved on December 21st, which would be crazy, but the shortest day of the year, versus June 21st, which would be crazy too, because we don't have any green grass in June. Our grass, we're annual grasslands. We get green in November, December, January, but it's too cold for you guys. Think it gets cold up there? I live in California. Sometimes we get frost. But from a standpoint of the grass, when the soil's temperature is like 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 42 degrees Fahrenheit, the grass simply won't grow. It's got to be warmer than that to get good growth. End of February, March, April, you won't find a place where grass grows faster. I mean, but then it's done. It's absolutely done. So we'd be crazy to calve in June. But photo period, if everything else was equal, if there was grass in June, the postpartum and estrus period is 40 days shorter at our latitude, June 21st, than it is December 21st. I'll bet you it's about 80 days shorter, maybe 90 days shorter where you are. It might even be a little more than that. So if I'm calving, say, March and April, I'm probably dealing with a postpartum period of 40, 50, 60 days, somewhere in that zone. If I'm calving June 21st, I'm probably dealing with a postpartum period of maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks. I might be off by a week on that. That's a big deal. Now, that doesn't mean you have to calve then, but that means the further away you get from that, the longer the annual cycle is going to be for a cow to give birth, have the uterus recover, and be able to get pregnant again. Because it's not enough to be in that first cycle. We want her to be at least in the second, preferably the third cycles where she's the most fertile. Now, getting back to the heifers. I wish there was a way, if they were calving earlier, which I don't like the idea of doing, but if they were calving earlier, and that would give them a longer postpartum and estrus period, but it would also let you do with them what you're talking about doing with the cows, and that's pulling the bulls and then putting them back in. So you're not selling an open heifer, you're selling a bred heifer to somebody else. That might be a really stupid idea. And I don't like that idea because it's going to mean you're going to be feeding hay to animals that I don't want to feed hay to, and I don't want you to feed hay to. But would there be a market for that later calving animal? And sometimes I wish the U.S. and Canada, I wish the border was different. I wish it was split vertically rather than horizontally, because there would be a market for those cows in California. You know, California, there's a lot of people calving it's really stupid for them to do it, but that's when they do it. They calve in October. Those heifers, those open heifers would be perfect down, you know, for this market. But that doesn't do you any good.
No, I guess to defend the idea a little bit, Dave, I learned the kind of the concept from Gabe Brown, which is be hard on your heifers. It's the cheapest time to figure out who's fertile and who's not fertile.
Mm-hmm.
I just love that idea of put the heifers through a system that challenges them. You don't want to celebrate 99% bred rate in your heifers. How do you know who's more fertile, who's going to?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, this is one of the things about people who would have a low culling rate. It usually means they're providing too much to their cows. They're babying them too much. But I had a guy who was had a serious accident. He went to the school, improved the operation, had a serious accident, and I mean, tragically was paralyzed. Couldn't do any physical work on the ranch, but he loved the livestock business. So he asked, how can I be in the livestock business when I can't do any physical work with cows? And we talked about it for a while. Well, he's now developed an enterprise where he's leasing about 1,000 cows. He's a 1,000 cow operator, but he doesn't run them himself. So he's leasing them to people who are starting up or strapped for capital or whatever. Another thought would be to lease those heifers to someone, and in part of payment, you get the anyway, I wonder if you could have somebody else farm out the heifer part of it. The issue becomes this, and I don't know what your economics are at all, but the answer to is this a good idea or not is going to boil down to projecting your gross margins and looking at the impact on overheads. And until I see that, I'm walking blind here. But if I can farm that out, a heifer will never have as good a margin as a cow. I've just never seen that happen. So every heifer that I keep, even if it's working, even if it's got an okay margin, it's eating grass that a higher margin cow could be eating. So it's competing for that resource with an animal that's got a higher margin. Is there a way of taking that and farming it out to somebody else, either on a custom basis or leasing it out and getting back the open H2s or whatever it might be? Anyway,
Well, I'll give you just
it's
a,
not what you're talking about is not a bad idea. All right, it's got way more positives than the negatives that I see right off the bat.
well, what I like is I took those and I was pretty reasonable with my costs. It's based on 2025 numbers, which it's taking a little bit to get used to, but I just took our uh, calf sale tickets, what our average animal sold, applied it to those 300 cow herd, how we are marketing today versus those values in the system that I just told you about. The increased profit on just the marketing those different animals, different times of the year, different classes of animals on 300 cows was $120,000 difference.
Wow, not bad. Let me ask you another question though. If I have, you said you have 300 cows right now, give or take?
We'll calve about 300 this spring, yep.
Okay. So if I gave you $1.2 million, you don't have any cows right now. They're all gone. They're gone. I handed you $1.2 million because that's about what your cow herd would probably sell for. Would you replace your cow herd or would you do something different?
That is a good question.
It's the question.
I know.
You know, it's been said that figuring out what the right question is half the battle right there. And to me, that's a question that we all ought to be asking ourselves. I mean, most of us listening to this are, I mean, if you're a player in the cattle business at all, you're worth millions of dollars. On the balance sheet, and you look at it, you know, your net worth $1 million, $5 million, $10 million, and yet some of us are living on $50,000 a year. I mean, that's lunacy. That's lunacy. So we all do have this option. I mean, one of the things I like to do at the school is get people to cross their arms, and you know that's reasonably comfortable. Then I ask them to cross them the other way. Go ahead and do that. Cross them the other way now.
I don't even know how to.
I know there's only two of them. You can figure this out, right? But when you do it, how's that feel?
Awkward.
Ooh, but what if I told you that you're going to get $1 million if you did that?
I'd probably do it.
You'd get comfortable with it really fast. I can't tell. I think this was the way that was uncomfortable before, but I've done it so often that they're both comfortable now. We don't like change, but the hardest part of change, the change isn't hard. It's resistance to change that's hard. That's what freaks us out. We ought to. That is change that we have prepared for. And by preparing for, I mean running the gross margins and seeing what the impact on the overheads would be, and how would this change the labor on the place, and what capital that is currently in this and that would get liberated to do other things. There's you have time for me to show you a tool?
As long as you have time, I got time, Dave.
What did I have? Let's see, where'd this thing go?
Oh, maybe. Oh, yeah, I'm not
There it
sharing.
Okay. I think it was back here. Yeah. This is a tool called a decision grid. So can you see my screen now?
You got it. Yep.
Okay. This is a tool, and somebody else must have come up with this, but I haven't seen it. I don't want to claim it as my own because it's so bloody simple, but it's also so bloody useful. What we do is and if anybody wants a PDF of the instructions for completing one of these, I'm happy to send it to them. They just have to send me an email saying, give me the instructions on decision grid. I've made a list of outcomes. Whatever decision I make, for example, if you're going to make this change in the enterprise, or if you're going to sell the cows, or whatever might be, what are the outcomes you want from whatever decision that is, right? Whatever decision you wind up making. there might be 10 or 12 different outcomes you're looking for. You know, simplify the operation, free up capital, have a really high margin, be drought resistant, you know, these kinds of things. Some of them might be more important than others. And so if they are, you might put 2 stars on it. That's going to double the weight. Now, you always come up with the criteria before you come up with the options. Now, this decision grid I put together is for estate planning. And I've got my idea of what we should do, and so has their idea, and another family member has their idea. So we explain our ideas to one another, and then as a team, we go in and we score each one against this criteria. All right, my idea. Does that make it likely it stays in the family? Well, we scored on a +10 to a -10. And -10 is like, no way, this is the worst possible result for that criteria that this could produce. A +10 is the best possible outcome for that criteria. So my idea didn't come out so well. This idea came out better. This idea came out great. Future ensures future success. Well, my idea didn't work very well. This one worked pretty well. That one, not. The third one, not so hot. The next one, neutral. This one, an okay result. This one's a little not quite as good. Anyway, we score each one, then we add up the totals. Now, it's pretty clear that my idea here sucks, right? But these 2 ideas, we've been trying to put objective scores on subjective things. And so really, there's no difference between these 2 scores. What I like to do is make a 4th column and say, all right, so now how can we come up with, instead of my idea and your idea and someone else's idea, how can we come up with our idea that takes the best out of everything? And make the fourth, anyway, make the 4th thing our idea. And I have yet to see that not come up with scores that are usually close to double, at least 50% higher, and often double what the best score down here is. If somebody wants to have confidence that they're doing, that a decision they're making is going to be the right thing, and not feel like I want to delay implementation, but be so eager to implement it because I know it's going to work, this process gets you there. So for something like your heifer idea, there's I would make 2 columns at least. The first column would be for the status quo. Here's what we're currently doing. Well, first, here are the outcomes we're looking for from whatever we do. Here's the status quo. Describe that as thoroughly as you can. And then here's this change that I'd like to consider making. And then work down through with the family and score them. And leave a 3rd column to say, how can we improve the idea? Make sense?
Very holistic.
It's so bloody simple. Chris Christopherson died last year. He's a folk singer, songwriter. He had a song, "Lying in Your Loving Arms" is the name of the song. There was a line in that said, "Looking back and longing for the freedom of my chains." And I love that line, the freedom of my chains. Sometimes people feel like structure like this is limiting, it's constraining. I feel like structure like this is liberating because I don't have to worry, am I going to miss something? So I can go all in. When we're talking about this idea right here against this criteria, I don't have to be distracted in the back of my mind thinking about, am I going to get to these other things? No, I can go all in on this because it's here on this structure. And I know I'm going to get to it. I'm trying to think of the guy who wrote a book on time management and office organization. He says, I can't think of the guy's name, but he says, your brain is a great place for having ideas, but it's a terrible place for holding them. And we tend to clutter up our brain with all these things that we're afraid we're going to forget. But if we have the right structure, we don't have to remember anything because it's there in the structure. And I don't have to remember, oh yeah, I have to, future success of the business areas. That's something that's important. I got to think of that. No, I don't. It's there. When it's time to get to it, I'll get to it. So I think having the right structure is really, really important to being able to make these decisions and being confident in those decisions. So.
Well, Dave, I want to be mindful of your time and excuse me, and the people on, but that is a perfect segue. We end these webinars the exact same same way. And that is, it's a little how we started the webinar. If you have to repeat yourself, that's great. But we always end with, for somebody that's just starting out, what in this industry or in farming in general, what's the best advice you could give them?
Don't approach ranching as a job. Approach it as a business. And take 20% of your time to work on the business. We spend all of our time working in it, working our butts off. But sometimes we're doing things that just don't make sense to do. And if we don't take that time to work on it, we can't be certain that we're doing the right things when we're working in it. There's the 80-20 rule says that 80% of the things we do produces 80% of the result, which means 80% of the things we do produce the other 20. The 80% of the results that you're going to get will be from that 20% of your time working on the business. 2 mornings. 2 mornings is 80% or 20% of your time. And why mornings? Because in the afternoon, you're tired, you're beat up, you've been working hard all day long, you can't think straight, you need a beer. Mornings when we're freshest, when we're most alert, when we're most able to focus. Problem is we tend to be doing the jobs, the farmhand jobs first thing in the morning. That's got to change. Working on the business stuff in the morning. That other stuff can wait. The working on it is just too valuable to not devote your prime time to.
I've I've told a lot of people this, but I didn't start running, or I didn't start. Now we've other stakeholders, but I didn't run my farm like a business until I started an off-farm business, figured out how a business is actually run, and then do it in reverse, apply those principles back to our own farm. So
Yeah, how are you supposed to know? No one ever teaches you. I mean, you learn how to raise cows and grow crops and work hard and fix fence, but nobody ever taught you how to run a business. How are you supposed to know?
no, and like you very accurately pointed out, it's like if you own land or have livestock, it's like you have millions of dollars in assets. It's like that is a business, and that does take
No,
management.
no. It's a very expensive hobby. It's a very expensive hobby unless you're going to actually work on the business. Then it's a business. And people will say, one other thing on this, people will say, well, what do I need to change? What needs to change for it to become a business? As though the change was something that had to happen out there somewhere. The change happens in here and in here. That's where it changes. And people will say, well, I don't want, that would detract from the lifestyle. It's such a better lifestyle when it's a business. Droughts are so much more easy to endure when yes, it's stressful, but it's not a personal stress, it's a business stress, and it's being dealt with because you're spending those 2 mornings a week. And one of the questions I like people, every once in a while, somebody will ask the question, is it possible to have a ranch and a life? There's a couple that came through the school a couple of years before I stepped out of it. And they were driving a school bus for off-farm income. And it was easy for them to find the 2 mornings a week because when do you drive the school bus? It's in the morning. Well, the money that the school bus was making was, I mean, maybe $18,000, $20,000 a year. He says, gee whiz, now it's child's play. $20,000 a year, I can make that in my sleep now. But the biggest impact with that, because ranching for profits kind of makes it sound like it's all about money. The guy's wife said, we've never been able to, he was missing church, he was missing kids' basketball games, and she said, we've never been able to take the kids camping. We're just too busy working. We did a conference when I retired called Ranching for Generations. And these 2 kids came up to me as I was setting things up the day before the conference. And they said, Mr. Pratt, we want to shake your hand. Okay, sure. Who are you? Well, we're so-and-so, and we got to go camping last summer. That's ranching for profit. I mean, they're making more money, they're working less, and they actually have a ranch and a life, and that's ranching for profit.
Well said, Dave. and seems like a very natural spot to end this. I want to thank you so much for your time. I had a lot of,
Sure.
I had a great time. I am going to take you up on your offer. We've only got 2 webinars left for this year, but next winter, if you're down for it, I'd love to dive into some
Sure.
of these topics in a little more detail.
Since nobody won, got to ask questions and won the jacket, I'm assuming I won the jacket.
I'm sending you both. I'll get you, I'll shoot you a text with some Field of Dreams photos, and I'll get your mailing address, and I'll get the crew at the office to send them out.
That sounds great. That sounds great.
Thanks a lot for your time, Dave. Have a great night.
All right, we'll catch you later.
We'll see you.
Okay, bye.